Louis II of Bourbon-Conde was born as the eldest son of Prince Henri II of Bourbon-Conde and Princess Charlotte Margaret of Montmorency on September 7, 1621. He had an older sister, Anne Geneviève, who married Duke Henri II of Longueville, and a younger brother, Armand De Bourbon, the Prince of Conti, who married Anne Martinozzi, a niece of Cardinal Jules Mazarin. Louis was exceptionally gifted and received an excellent education in the Jesuit monastery of Bourges. After his education in Bourges, Louis was sent to l'Académie Royale, where he trained as a soldier and horseman. In 1637, when Louis was 16 years old, he became acting governor of Picardy and Burgundy due to the absence of his father. That same year, Burgundy was attacked by a relatively small regiment of Spaniards. The Condé did not hesitate for a moment and set out to drive back the enemy, and succeeded without any problem. In 1641, Louis married a niece of Richelieu, Claire Clémence de Maille-Brézé, a 12-year-old child. This marriage was arranged by Louis's father, who was looking for ways to tighten his relationship with Richelieu. Louis himself strongly opposed the marriage. Claire Clémence was ugly, dull, and barely educated. Furthermore, she came from the lower nobility, which the young Louis did not like. He eventually agreed to the marriage, but hardly looked after his wife and was not faithful to her. Nonetheless, the couple had a son, Henri Jules, named after his grandfather and Cardinal Jules Mazarin. On May 19, 1643, at the Battle of Rocroi, De Condé helped the French army win a victory over the Spanish army. The powerful Armand du Plessis, Cardinal de Richelieu, and Prime Minister of Louis XIII, died in 1642. He had appointed Jules Mazarin as his successor, advising both him and the king to place the then 22-year-old Louis II de Bourbon-Conde in command of the northern armed forces. Upon the death of Richelieu, King Philippe IV of Spain was advised to invade France at Rocroi and to advance to Paris via Reims. King Louis XIII, who suffered from Crohn's disease, said to his great-nephew, Henri of Bourbon-Conde, on his death day of March 14, 1643, "My enemies are at the gate, but fortunately your son will drive them away." De Condé eventually faced the enemy with 22,000 foot soldiers, 6,000 cavalrymen and dragoons, and 12 cannons. He attacked the Spanish army at 3 a.m. on May 19, after a deserter from the Spanish regiment told him that the Spaniards expected reinforcements in the morning. After a battle which lasted for 8 hours, De Condé was victorious. The victory was a pivotal moment for France, a turning point in history, and ended the 30 Years' War. De Condé personally presented his victory to the then 5-year-old Louis XIV and Regent Anne of Austria. The captured banners were ceremoniously taken to Notre Dame in Paris, after which a Te Deum was performed. In 1646, De Condé's father, Henri II, died. Louis now inherited the title of Prince de Condé and various other titles. Furthermore, he inherited an enormous fortune and became part of the main advisory board of Anne of Austria, who was regent of France at the time. All these factors of power, combined with his successes on the battlefield, made De Condé a major threat to Anne of Austria and Jules Mazarin. De Condé played an important role in the Fronde, the rebellion of the French parliament against the French king. The Fronde erupted when Mazarin increased taxes, after which parliament demanded more power to control the government. Barricades were erected in the city, and when the issue remained unsettled, Anne of Austria and Louis XIV took refuge in Saint-Germain-en-Laye. From January to March 1649, at the behest of Mazarin, De Condé placed a blockade on Paris, allowing the court to return. However, De Condé's loyalty waned when he ran into trouble at court, where he was still seen as a great danger. In January 1650, de Condé was arrested by Mazarin. His arrest caused renewed uprisings. After de Condé, his brother and his brother-in-law were imprisoned for a year in the Château de Vincennes without any form of a trial, de Condé started a second Fronde. On July 2, 1652, de Condé was defeated by Turenne. De Condé left Paris on October 13, 1652. In November of that year, de Condé and his regiment defected to the Spanish Netherlands. Mazarin had him sentenced to death in absentia on March 27, 1654, and all his possessions were confiscated. At the end of 1654, he stayed at the southern Netherlands and presented himself as the Count of Flanders. After the Battle of Dunkirk, where de Condé suffered a second defeat against Turenne and his homeland, he decided to return to France. His previous victories and achievements had not been forgotten by his cousin Louis XIV, who pardoned de Condé and returned to him most of his possessions. In 1672, de Condé undertook a campaign in the name of France against the Republic of the Seven United Netherlands. But when the Dutch opened their dikes, it became impossible for the French to advance. Eventually, the Battle of Senef between a French army under the command of de Condé, who had 30 years of military experience and the best cavalry in the world, and the combined Dutch-Spanish-Habsburg-German army, under the command of a young and inexperienced stadtholder William III, ended in a draw. Both sides claimed victory. It was the bloodiest battle of the year. De Condé resigned from his military post in 1675, crooked with gout. He spent many of his last years at his Chantilly estate, but remained closely involved in French warfare as an advisor to other generals. De Condé was praised by Louis XIV, who officially granted him the title of the Great Condé and presented him with a large pink diamond which was aptly named Le Grand Condé. During the accompanying ceremony, de Condé was unable to bow before the king due to his gout. De Condé addressed Louis XIV with the words, "I'm sorry, I'm having some trouble walking." To which Louis XIV replied, "Nephew, if I were as laureled as you are, I'd have a hard time walking too." De Condé died on December 11, 1686, at the age of 65 at the Château de Fontainebleau. Louis XIV reacted to his death by saying, "I have just lost the greatest man in my kingdom." A mausoleum for the Grand Condé was erected in the Church of the Family Domain in Valérie, Burgundy, where all the princes and princesses of de Condé are buried. This concludes this week's video. Join me next week for a video on Marie-Thérèse Raphaëlla of Spain, the first wife of Louis Ferdinand of France. See you then.